In a decision that will echo for generations, the Supreme Court has issued a ruling that will fundamentally reshape the landscape of American gun rights and the daily lives of millions of citizens. With this historic decision, the court has not only altered the legal framework, but also reignited a national debate about the balance between individual freedoms and public safety. The 6-3 ruling in Woolford v. Lopez strikes down key state-level concealed carry restrictions, creating a new national standard for carrying firearms in public. This means that for the first time, states with some of the strictest gun laws must now allow most law-abiding citizens to carry concealed weapons outside their homes. This decision dramatically expands the right to carry concealed weapons, invalidating laws in several populous states and setting a precedent that will reshape daily life and law enforcement. Police departments, city officials, and community leaders are now grappling with how to adapt to this sweeping change. For decades, a patchwork of state laws governed where and how citizens could carry firearms. This ruling bulldozes that map. The legal landscape is shifting rapidly, and states are being forced to rewrite their regulations almost overnight. The court has declared that the right to bear arms extends beyond the home and into most public spaces, with very few exceptions. This means that places once considered off-limits may now see more armed citizens, raising new questions about safety and responsibility. As states scramble to comply and citizens adjust, the questions are many. How will local governments enforce new rules, and what new challenges will communities face as a result? What does this mean for your local park, your favorite restaurant, or your child's school? Will new policies be put in place to address concerns, or will uncertainty linger as the nation adapts? The answers are beginning to unfold, and they will define our nation for years to come. As Americans everywhere grapple with the implications, one thing is clear. This Supreme Court decision marks a turning point in the ongoing story of gun rights in the United States. The legal journey to today's ruling is deeply rooted in the Second Amendment, which has sparked centuries of debate about the meaning and limits of the right to bear arms. From the nation's founding, Americans have wrestled with how to balance individual freedoms with public safety, and the question of who can carry a concealed weapon has always been at the heart of this discussion. For most of American history, states and local governments set their own firearm rules, resulting in a patchwork of laws that varied widely from place to place. Some regions were permissive, while others imposed strict regulations, reflecting local attitudes and concerns about violence, crime, and personal defense. In the 19th century, many states responded to rising concerns about violence by restricting or outright banning concealed weapons. These laws were rarely challenged on Second Amendment grounds, as the prevailing view was that the amendment protected state militias, not necessarily individual gun ownership or carrying in public. Over time, however, the conversation began to shift. Legal scholars and gun owners started to question whether these restrictions were truly constitutional, planting the seeds for a broader movement that would emerge in the decades to come. This changed dramatically in the late 20th century, as gun rights advocates pushed for a new interpretation of the Second Amendment as an individual right. Organizations like the NRA and other advocacy groups mobilized, challenging restrictive laws and reshaping public opinion. The 2008 Supreme Court case District of Columbia v. Heller marked a turning point, affirming the right to possess a firearm for self-defense at home. However, the decision left open important questions about carrying firearms in public, setting the stage for future legal battles. In 2022, the Supreme Court addressed these questions in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin. The court struck down New York's restrictive licensing law and established a new historical test for evaluating gun regulations, fundamentally changing the legal landscape. States like Hawaii responded swiftly, enacting sweeping new laws that designated vast public areas as sensitive places where guns were banned. These measures sparked fresh controversy and legal challenges as lawmakers and citizens debated the proper scope of gun rights in public spaces. Hawaii's Act 52 soon became the subject of Woolford v. Lopez, a pivotal case that would test the boundaries of the new legal framework. The outcome of this case has led directly to today's historic decision, shaping the future of concealed carry in America. Wolford vs. Lopez began as a challenge to Hawaii's 2023 law, one of the nation's most restrictive after Bruin. The law banned concealed firearms on nearly all private property open to the public and declared many public spaces as sensitive places. Plaintiffs argued these restrictions made the right to carry meaningless and failed the historical test set by Bruin. Hawaii defended the law as a public safety measure, citing historical precedent for regulating firearms in sensitive places. The Ninth Circuit upheld the law, but the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, setting the stage for a major constitutional showdown. During oral arguments, conservative justices questioned the historical basis for Hawaii's broad bans, while liberal justices raised concerns about public safety. The central conflict: how to apply an 18th-century historical test to modern realities. Today, the court delivered its answer in a decisive 6-3 vote siding with the challengers. Justice Clarence Thomas's majority opinion delivered an expansive reading of the Second Amendment right to carry firearms in public. The court held Hawaii's law unconstitutional, finding its broad restrictions inconsistent with the nation's historical tradition. The majority rejected post-Civil War laws as precedent, focusing on the era of the Second Amendment's ratification. Only a narrow set of sensitive places, like legislative assemblies and courthouses, have historical precedent for firearm bans. The ruling narrows the definition of sensitive places and invalidates the legal foundation for broad gun-free zones. The opinion reaffirms that the Second Amendment is not a second-class right and mandates states permit concealed carry in most public areas. This marks a dramatic shift in the balance between individual rights and public safety. In a sharply worded dissent, Justice Elena Kagan, joined by Justices Sotomayor and Jackson, condemned the majority's decision as reckless and dangerous. The dissent argued that the majority's rigid historical test strips legislatures of the ability to address modern gun violence. They accused the majority of cherry-picking history and warned that the ruling will lead to more guns in places like parks and bars. The dissent raised concerns about increased risks for law enforcement and the public, and argued the decision undermines states' rights to govern themselves. Hawaii, with its unique geography and culture, should be able to balance gun rights and public safety as it sees fit. Instead, the court has imposed a one-size-fits-all solution, prioritizing a selective interpretation of history over public safety. The dissent concluded this ruling is a profound blow to federalism and the well-being of the American people. The Supreme Court's decision in Wolford vs. Lopez has triggered a seismic shift in gun laws across the U.S., sending shockwaves through both legal and political communities. This landmark ruling is being called one of the most significant Second Amendment cases in decades, and its effects are being felt almost immediately. The ruling invalidates core provisions of restrictive concealed carry laws in at least 6 states, including Hawaii, California, and New York. These states, which previously had some of the strictest requirements for carrying firearms in public, are now scrambling to respond as their long-standing regulations are overturned. Overnight, gun-free zones in public parks, restaurants, and private businesses open to the public are no longer enforceable. This means that areas once considered off-limits to firearms are now accessible to permit holders, creating uncertainty for business owners and the public alike. In New York, permit holders can now carry firearms in places like the subway and Times Square. These iconic locations, previously protected by strict local ordinances, must now adapt to a new reality where concealed carry is permitted. In California, bans at beaches and amusement parks are void. Families visiting these popular destinations may now encounter armed individuals, a dramatic change from previous policy. The decision also strengthens the legal position of gun owners in states with permitless carry and pressures Congress to consider national reciprocity. Advocates for gun rights see this as a major victory, while opponents worry about the broader implications for public safety. Some sensitive places, like schools and government buildings, remain gun-free, as the court recognized the need for certain exceptions to protect vulnerable populations and maintain order in critical spaces. And private property owners can still prohibit firearms with proper signage, giving them the right to set their own rules and maintain control over their premises. This new legal landscape is confusing and will likely spark further legal battles over what counts as public or private space. Courts will be asked to clarify the boundaries, and legal experts predict a wave of lawsuits as states and cities attempt to navigate the ruling's complexities. State and local officials now face the daunting task of rewriting laws to comply with this new constitutional standard, a process that will take months, if not years, and will shape the future of gun policy in America. The Woolford v. Lopez decision is reshaping American politics, policing, and public life. It's a major victory for Republicans and gun rights groups, energizing conservative voters and donors. Democrats and gun control advocates are galvanized, making gun policy a central issue in upcoming elections. For law enforcement, the new reality is challenging. Officers must now assume more people are armed in more places, complicating every interaction. The visible presence of firearms in public spaces will become more common, bringing both a sense of security for some and anxiety for others. Businesses must now decide whether to allow armed patrons or risk backlash from either side. The tourism industry in states like Hawaii and California may also be affected as perceptions of public safety shift. The full social and economic impact will take years to measure. Experts and advocates are deeply divided on the Supreme Court's decision. Supporters hail it as a victory for constitutional liberty, arguing it restores rights unconstitutionally denied to millions. Legal scholars say the ruling provides clarity and ends defiant legislative tactics in restrictive states. On the other side, public health experts warn that more guns in public will lead to more violence and harm marginalized communities. Critics argue the court ignored decades of research and prioritized an absolutist view of one right over public safety. Representative Dan Goldman warns the decision forces a race to the bottom on gun safety, with the most vulnerable communities bearing the heaviest burden. The debate is fierce, with both sides insisting the future of American freedom and safety is at stake. The court's ruling has set the stage for a new era of legal and social conflict. Today's Supreme Court decision in Woolford v. Lopez is a turning point in the American story. By expanding the right to carry concealed firearms in public, the court has ignited a new and uncertain chapter in the nation's gun debate. State legislatures will now test the boundaries of the ruling, while Congress faces renewed debate over national reciprocity. In towns and cities, citizens and business owners must navigate a world with more guns in more public spaces. The decision will influence where people feel safe, how law enforcement operates, and the tenor of political discourse. The court has provided its answer, but the consequences will be written in the daily experiences of Americans. As the nation steps across this threshold, the conversation is far from over. The story of the Second Amendment continues, and its next pages are now ours to write.